Welcome to Search Rebel, the podcast for those curious about the world of search, even if they don't realize it yet. We're here for entrepreneurs through acquisition, following the swings and arrows of outrageous fortune and crafting the life and career that we love. Today we have Soraya Alden, founder and managing partner of Kesher. Soraya's journey into the world of small business acquisitions began when she sold her family's auto body shop in 2014. She brings a wealth of experience from her time in investment management, including roles at BlackRock, Bertram Capital, and Susquehanna Private Capital. Soraya's insights into navigating the complexities of due diligence, especially in industries like manufacturing and direct-to-consumer businesses, are invaluable. Plus, she'll share a little bit about her life as a new mom and living in Tel Aviv after relocating from San Francisco. Soraya, I'm very excited to have you on board. So let's jump right into some questions that we have for you. I'm excited to get your perspective. First of all, if you could share a little bit about your journey. I know it's been a long and complex one, from working in investment management to becoming a founder and managing partner at Kesher.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll tell you that, I spent most of my career being a lower middle market private equity investor. So what does that mean? It means investing in businesses that are anywhere from 30 million in sales up to 150 million in sales. So call it 5 million and up, and doing a roll up strategy. So finding smaller businesses, competitors, suppliers, what have you, that make sense to acquire and kind of roll up. So that's really where I've spent the bulk of my career, working in other funds, as you mentioned, a few of them. And then in 2023, I said, why don't I give this a shot? Why don't I try to be an independent sponsor myself? So that was actually the intent of 2023. And what happened was I was referred a few businesses, people that I'd worked with, and they said, oh, you should speak with them. He's thinking of retiring. And what I realized was there's a massive hole in the market where you have these retiring baby boomers, especially in the US, and they just aren't getting high quality advice. They aren't getting high quality consulting work. And there's reasons for that. They're smaller businesses. These advisors and bankers and consultants would rather less complicated businesses that are bigger, have more reporting. It's just easier. And when you're doing a percentage base, you make more money. So what you end up having is like below this 5 to 6 million of EBITDA range on the smaller end of the market. These small business owners are just not getting the quality that they should get. So I started initially just giving sort of my 2 cents of advice, or just talking through growth strategies or transition planning, or all the questions that anyone has when they're thinking about retiring. So that's how it kind of started. And so really it's evolved into a business where I'm able to provide financial diligence, commercial business diligence, customer diligence, helping with cash conversion, and really deal dynamics. And so I help either companies that are looking to sell, or searchers and entrepreneurs that want to buy businesses and they haven't spent 7 years plus in private equity. If you're counting hours, it's a lot more than 7 years of my experience personally. So it's just not a language that a lot of people are fluent in. It's different to be an accountant and to have your CPA versus understanding corporate finance and understanding, well, wait a second, how does this translate into growth drivers of the business? And how does this translate into what actually happened? Does the story that the seller is telling me, if you're the searcher and you're the buyer, is that actually aligned with what the data says? And if not, how do I reconcile that? What questions can I ask? And how do I know if the seller's right or the data's right? And it can just be a lot. And to be able to ask those questions in a way where a seller doesn't feel like you're throwing them off, they're not overwhelmed. There's also the emotional side of it and the people side of it too that you need to be able to balance. So that's kind of what I think excites me about what I'm doing, is I just feel like there's not a whole lot of people that frankly leave private equity to do this, and I love it, and I love being able to help searchers as well. I mean, it's a newer ecosystem, and I think it's a great one that probably will help solve a lot of this retiring baby boomer issue, where there's a lot of businesses that don't have the right sort of next person to lead the business. I think that's where searchers come in.
Yeah, I just to add on to that, because I'm curious, do you find yourself more sympathetic to or drawn to the sell side or the buy side?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that with the buy side, I'm helping different types of situations. So it could be someone that owns a business and they want to buy a competitor. It's just an add on acquisition for them. Those can be, frankly, shorter and a little bit easier because you kind of know pretty quickly. You can easily figure out the red flags. I tell you the red flags. I'm not a quality of earnings provider. So my red flags are different. They're more like, all right, if I were to invest in this business, here's what I would notice. And I can kind of get to that pretty quickly. I think on the sell side, there's a lot more emotion. There's a lot more of the questions about what do I do with my life now? It's just a huge life decision. It's not that I don't like helping with that, but it's just that it's almost agonizing. I can't give them the answers to some of these questions. They're very personal. Those are some of the differences, not to mention that with the sell side, you're handling someone's baby, a business they have owned and built, and you have to do everything you can to position it as best as possible for a buyer to come in and understand the company and to present it well. There's a ton more. I feel a responsibility to really put my best foot forward. And you're also in front of a lot more buyers, right? You could be in an auction process. And so there's a lot more that kind of goes into that versus on the buy side. You are the one making those requests and you're assuming that the advisor on the other side of the seller has the answers. So it's just a little bit, I think, simpler for me personally.
Can you share what inspired you to land in this focus more on industries like manufacturing and the direct to consumer product?
Yeah, I also ended up doing a few B2B business services deals too. But I mean, really, it was just I wanted to drink from the fire hose in my 20s and just kind of work as hard as I could. I know people usually don't think of their 20s like that, but
Right.
for me, it was a decade of a lot of work. Um, and so that was my attitude. And you know what? It was also a little bit of when you work in a company or in a fund, you look around at like leadership and leadership styles. At least I always have like, do I want to be like that person when I grew up? And, do I like that person's life? And so it just happened to be that there was different working styles across different kind of sector focuses. One team, one sector focus was super buttoned up, super investment banking, very New York, very type A, and like no tolerance for error. So I wanted to learn from that. I was like, that's great training, amazing. But then on the other hand, it's very stressful and it's difficult. And so I had the balance of the other team that was more of an 80-20 approach where they could kind of get to the same answer as the other team. They would come to the same answer and the 80-20 would get there way faster. But just kind of learning those different styles as well as like different sectors, different industries. I think it's fascinating to learn about different businesses and different industries and just understand how the world works today. It's not history, it's right now. How do apparel companies sell on the internet? I mean, what are the key levers for growth? And then you see 20 of those types of companies or 30, and then all of a sudden you kind of know a thing or two and you start to see some pattern. So that's how I approached it. I didn't fall in love with a certain industry or business necessarily. I'd also say like I've never been like a super techie SaaS person where like I like to see and feel things. And I also think with traditional businesses, sometimes they're overlooked. They're the less sexy of what's going on right now in the world to some people. I mean, to me, I think it's like there's tons of interesting and sexy
Yeah.
things to learn about traditional businesses.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. All right. Given your experience, what are some common pitfalls? I know there's going to be so many, but maybe just the most common or the most scary or challenges that small business owners face during the due diligence process.
For sellers, maybe this is a generalization, but in my experience, I've found that like the smaller deal sizes, it's also probably correlated with not having the right advisors surrounding you. But these smaller business owners massively underestimate how long and complex these deal processes can be. And even if they understand the timeline, they might not understand what really goes into that and the commitment it requires. They're still running their day to day business and they don't quite realize, well, wait a second. It's not just that you need to go on QuickBooks and get whatever financials, recent financials. You're going to need more than just the most recent. You might need annual, you might need quarterly, you might need monthly. They're going to have questions for you. And that's just financials. I mean, let's talk about census data, employees, insurance, environmental. The list goes on of the questions that buyers need. And I just find that they're really underestimating the deal process. And then the other piece is I think they tend to get caught on minutia. You're about to make millions of dollars and you're worried about the $50,000 of inventory that you think you should get paid for. Man, see the forest through the trees. Let's get this deal done. And the last part I'd say too is the emotional piece, right? They might underestimate, okay, I thought my motivations for selling were I just wanted to retire and it's time, but it actually turns out that I'm really attached to this business and my family's in this business. And there can be that piece of it, which really requires a lot of self-reflection ahead of time. You're not by the time you're in a deal process, you can't sway that too much. It's a personal decision, not failing to really understand a buyer. And, it's not always the highest bidder that makes the most sense. And people say they understand that. They say they care about who is going to run their business and will mesh better with the company post closing. Right. But there is another point, which is the speed and certainty of closing. These smaller business owners, they can get burnout. They're running a business, frankly, on a usually underinvested team. It really usually relies on the key seller and owner running the day to day. And so to put on another work stream on top of that, and then just have it dragged on because you wanted to get the one buyer that was $1 million above everyone else. But in reality, they're going to come down on price because it was too good to be true in the first place, or, what have you. And then by the end of it, the seller's like, man, I'm burnt out. Like, I need a break. And then the deal falls apart. So these are just a few of the things that I've seen in the smaller deal size.
Okay. And from the buyer perspective, I guess a lot of the same things kind of work in the other direction.
Yeah. I think it depends what kind of buyer. What I have learned as a buyer for these smaller deals, you have to pick your battles. You might think that really nailing the network and capital tag at the end, how network and capital is handled, you might think you need a full hour-long call to explain the mechanism. Or you might just say, we think this number for network capital is going to be within this range. Let's just agree to pick a number together and move on. Right. And so I think the prioritization of timing, the prioritization of certain topics in order to save time, right? Time management is really important. Just really figuring out what do you need to prioritize, what really matters.
Very sensible. Yeah, I mean, tell me if you think this is an interesting point. I'm wondering about, would you approach diligence differently for small family-run businesses compared with much larger corporations?
Yeah. I mean, and maybe this is going to be a theme of the call, but I'm biased. I'm used to bigger deals. I think the bigger companies are easier. You have more information. You have management teams that are used to looking at data. They're used to having KPIs. They might have a board. They might have quarterly meetings. They are a well-oiled machine, many of them. With smaller family-run businesses, they just don't have the time or even care or need to. Many of these smaller family-run businesses are like, well, I put $1 million in cash in the bank every year, so why do I need to have any KPIs? If it's not broken, why try to fix it? And that's totally fine. What sort of battles do you really need to fight? What sort of data should you be asking for? You need to figure out what your critical items are and focus on those. And then also timing. Do you want to actually reveal all of your questions right at the outset? How do you time it? Does this come pre-LOI, post-LOI? Can this be done after closing? Kind of going through the decision tree of all right, if I ask this question and it gives me a yes versus a no, then what happens? Is it that I get down through a few steps down the road where I realize, okay, this might be too risky for me, right? So really being thoughtful about what you spend time asking. And this is coming from a person, myself, who's very thorough. And I would lean very thorough. but I've learned to improve over time with these smaller deals.
That's super interesting advice. Like, do you literally plan out your questions ahead of time and think which ones to hold back or which ones to only ask after you get the answers to the first one? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I'll have my list of yeah, I actually the way that I do it is like at the top, I'll say, all right, what are the 5 things or 3 things I need to get out of this conversation? Or what answers do I have to have? And then sometimes they'll give you an answer, but you'll realize, wait a second, like, doesn't really make sense. Is that really true? Like, the data kind of doesn't really show that. So is it the data or is it the person or do they just not know? Sometimes you need to circle back because you're given the answer, but then you realize after you receive more data, it doesn't really tick and tie. Let's simplify. What are the 3, 5 things at the top I need to get out of the conversation? And then underneath my list, I'll have sub bullets of like A, B, C, where I'm figuring out, all right, what do I really want to press on? What do I not want to press on? The other way to do it is instead of questions, you just have topics and you're just like, okay, I want to understand competitive dynamics and market, which for small businesses, they don't really know. Like sometimes they're just like, man, I don't really know a lot about my competitors. I actually have no idea how big the market is.
Yes.
So
Yeah. I was on a call like that this week. It's so crazy. My SBA broker said like this guy has just been successful despite himself. And it really was, he was kind of like, I don't know how this all happened. Been
yeah,
doing 40 years, like he's making great money and the answer to most questions was like,
I don't know.
yeah,
Right. So
yeah.
what do you do if you keep getting an I don't know? Right? You're like, okay, well, I gotta switch my line of questioning. You gotta be careful because you don't want them to think you're a know-it-all, just walking in there and already having an idea about what's driving their business. But that's common. People don't know how they've been successful or they're just completely wrong. They'll say, we've never changed pricing. Like we just like pricing is not a factor for us. We're fine. And then you look at the information and you're going, oh, wait a
No.
second. They may not have changed pricing, but they launched new products, which were a totally different price. And the older products at a different price aren't being sold as much. So there you go. There's mix shift. And part of that is pricing.
Right.
So it's a fun dance, the diligence
Yeah.
process. I personally love it.
Do you have a memorable success story you could share from one of your acquisitions or an acquisition you were involved in where diligence played like a pivotal role?
I have an example where we invested in a company and shortly thereafter, one of their top customers really just said, we're not going to continue with you in the future. They basically shut down the department that was employing this supplier. And so perhaps the customer didn't know that was going to happen, and that's possible. Maybe we could have, though, made sure we were speaking to the right person, also who are you speaking with within the company? Are they the key decision maker? So I would say like try to press a little bit more on customer calls if you can and try to not make the, mistake of, well, it's the end of the deal anyway. We put so much, it's like, what do you say? There's some cost bias, right? Like
Yeah.
we've already spent so much time on it. Like, let's just check the box and move on. Really try to understand when you're at the end, and it is a strategy that some sellers and buyers use where they will try to exhaust the other side towards the end, and leave some of the important stuff for the end and rely on someone getting burnout to have less questions. So I would just pay attention to that. In upper middle market private equity or bulge bracket, like bigger deals, right? There can be very material differences between the winning bid. And through that, there's shifting power dynamics where the buyer knows that they're the one, or they can sense it through questions and through what data is being transmitted. And you can kind of sense if you're really the only party around or if you're gonna win this thing hands down. And so with that, you can get some bad behavior where you have the buyer that might retrade you, for example, at the end. Like the buyer will say, actually, like, turns out we found this, and this, and this, and EBITDA is materially lower. And, therefore we need to pay you less. Um, and,
Actually, I would love to
might,
double click on that actually.
yeah,
Because I think this is a very active kind of discussion in like the searcher community is like how much thought do you have to put into that LOI? And obviously everyone knows it doesn't have to be binding at all. But then how is it viewed if you give an LOI with a view to changing the price down the line
Totally.
just to get the
Yeah.
deal and contract so that no one else is snooping around or like people for sure and me too like would use an LOI as part of a strategy. But how do you how do you look out for your own interests as a searcher doing that without being a bad actor or taking advantage
Yeah.
of the situation?
Yeah, I think it's difficult, and it's especially difficult when you feel like everyone else is doing that as well, right? If you go, all right, I see, from my point of view, if I'm helping a consultant, I'm consulting on these bids and they say, what do you think about these bids? I can see all of them that come in. And so I can see that, okay, and by the questions that they're asking, like, this is not real, right? And so it's difficult if you're the only one that's giving a real bid and you don't plan to come down, right? Then you might not even make it into the next round. So the answer is I think you need to have a little bit of both, right? You need to be within the range of what you think the range will be. So you need to believe a little bit of what they're saying EBITDA is in order to get to the next round. If there is a round, right? If it's exclusive or not exclusive, right? You need to be able to get there and to validate. And in some ways, you need to give them the benefit of the doubt. But in other ways, you can be transparent ahead of time when you submit the LOI and say, hey, look, here's what I'm flagging as some of the key issues. I've looked at your financials. I can see that, for example, gross margin is swinging up and down all over the place. If I just put into Excel gross margin at 20% and then I put into Excel gross margin at 40%, your EBITDA swings quite a lot. And so we have to validate that. I have to understand, like, how are you valuing inventory? What are your cutoff times? Like, why would gross margin, is that real fluctuation or is that something kind of, wrong in your process or your accounting? So that's just one example. And you can explain that in your LOI. You can say, contingent upon financial diligence, but you can get a little bit more specific on what are the line items, right? So some things are like management compensation, that's easy, contingent on, inventory valuation or understanding COGS and contingent on understanding other operational expenses in the business. Kind of give your voiceover of like, here are the things that might sway EBITDA one way or another. And I would try to be fair to both sides. The other thing is timing. Are you bidding off of EBITDA, forward EBITDA? Like, we're in March. So someone can say, all right, June is expected to be here and I want you to, pay me off of that EBITDA. Or are they just like, we don't even have 2024. You're going to bid off of 2023. And so you want to introduce that element of a moving target in time. It can hurt you, but it can also help you.
Just um I've found that with businesses that have, tangible inventory, there's always a conversation about what time of year it is and how much, outstanding, how many POs they have and how much outstanding manufacturing is still going to happen. And everyone tries to be clever about the point in the cycle that you're going to take a snapshot to
Right.
best serve your interest or their interest or whoever's interest. And I always find this very confusing because to me, it's like you're buying the company. So you're going to cycle through the cycle. I don't really understand what difference it makes, but maybe you have some wisdom about that.
Totally. I mean, look, the way that I think about that is you want to buy, you're buying. So first of all, like EBITDA, what is it? It's sort of, think of it as like your profitability or cash flow, like steady state cash flow of the business that you can expect. And I'm doing like air quotes, right? That you can expect in the future. And that's why as you go up market, you see all these crazy adjustments, even maybe down market too. Because people are trying to say, well, we had this lost customer or we gained this new customer. And if you annualize that forward,
Right.
that's what you'll get in the future. So EBITDA is actually bigger. And so with net working capital, some of those concepts are the same. It's like, what is the net working capital that you can expect to come with the business? So to your point, you're totally right. Like, you are buying the business with sufficient net working capital in order to operate the business. That's what you're buying. I think when people get caught up as sellers, a lot of the time feel like, well, wait a second, no, but I just bought this inventory that I haven't gotten paid yet for. And is
So do you
that
think
worth
that's fair, or is that an example of a seller losing the forest for the trees? Or does it depend on
I
the percentage of the overall like purchase price?
I personally think it's the latter. And I think, this is where it's like the art of the negotiation, right? You need to decide as a buyer, like, do you really want to press on this or not? And with net working capital in particular, like I'll always map it. I'll say, all right, here's what the trailing 24 months looks like, 12 months, six. And, I'll play with it and I'll just do that as a percentage of like LTM sales, or I'll also then do it by days, right? So inventory days and AR days and AP days, or, whatever it is in the business, accrued as percentage of sales expenses. And so you can kind of triangulate around like, all right, what is this number ish? And like, am I okay with that number being like up 10% or down 10%? If the seller is like really angling for, somewhere within that range, think about it. Is it worth really having this conversation and angling for this? Or do you just say, okay, I'm fine with that approach, and you move on to something that's going to be more important? I think for smaller deals, that's the way to go. I think for bigger deals, obviously, these can be much more material numbers. And it also depends on the steadiness of the business. I will caveat. If you have a high growth D2C commerce business, for example, you might have some very different trends in net working capital. You do need to take that into account. I'm thinking more from the perspective of like a stable manufacturing company, for example.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, gonna kind of wrap it up here. I just would love to shift gears a little bit and touch on your personal life a bit more. How has your experience been as a new mom? Congratulations. And how has that influenced your approach to work-life balance, which I have to assume it has?
Yeah. Look, I will say I have newfound respect for anyone who decides to be a parent. I think, the 20 nothing year old self of mine with all these like women in finance groups would want to stab my eyes out when a mom got up there. Cause all she would talk about is like work life balance and this and that. And I'm like, why don't you tell me how to do my job better? Why don't you tell me what skills I need? Like, what is this BS? A woman gets up there and all she wants to talk about is like work life balance. And now that I'm sitting in the seat, I realize like it is because it's a whole other job on top of your job. And time management is so important. And I actually just think the skills that you gain from being a parent transcend everything. I mean, it's time management, functioning on low sleep, being okay with uncertainty and not having all the solutions or never not having the right answer like ever, right? All the things you hear about being a parent. And I think that allows, from a work perspective, allows you to be more flexible and really gives you a new perspective of, hey, not everything goes according to plan. And that's okay. You can live with that. And actually, you can excel under those circumstances. So I don't know. I'm loving it. I'm loving,
Yeah,
being
it's
a parent so
beautiful.
far. I'm new, so I don't have all the answers myself at all. But
I don't think you ever get the answers. I
yeah,
don't know. I'm still waiting. I
yeah,
know there's answers.
yeah.
And I know you fairly recently made a big move from San Francisco to Tel Aviv. Can you tell us a little about how your life has changed or what brought that about?
Yeah. I think for me, it it was the decision to actually live my life a little bit more aligned with my values. I just felt like I was kind of doing a lot of the same every day. And I would wake up one day and say, wait a second, is this really like what I decided to do with my life? And it's not to say, I didn't love my job. I did. I just didn't have time to really be the person and have the actions aligned with my values. Someone that wants to help the community. Well, wait a second. What have I really done for my community? Things like that.
Mm.
And so, someone that loves to travel is really interested in different cultures and also my own culture and identity. And what is that identity? And all those sort of bigger questions. I think that's what sort of caused the shift and the move to Tel Aviv. And I've loved Tel Aviv. I think it's a great city just in general. And it's very entrepreneurial. So I
Oh,
think
yeah.
that was part of what influenced me to, hey, why don't I try this out by myself? Do I need to work at a big company with, something for my resume, or should I actually like see what I can do? So it's been great. And I'd say, the other piece is, obviously Israel's in the Middle East. There's certain geopolitical conflicts here.
Yep.
Um, so you have to learn to live a little bit with the uncertainty and be flexible and not be as fear driven and not be as rigid. I think now that I'm on the other side, I get on calls with people from other countries that are really used to things going according to plan, and they get very shaken up when they don't. And so it's just something that I realized, like, sure, things drive me nuts here because it is the Middle East. And, why is someone in my parking spot again? But I think it's made me a bit stronger and a bit more of an interesting person, I hope, anyway.
I would just love if you could touch on how you can help searchers on their journeys and then where they can find you or get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'd say I'm happy to help just in general, email me at soraya@keshercap.com or LinkedIn message me. I like the ecosystem that's been building. I think it's healthy for the economy. I think it's the right people owning these businesses. So I'm very bullish on the whole thing. And, I'm happy to have a call and just think of me as like N of one that's giving my opinion on something. I'm no one special, but I'm happy to be a sounding board for some of these, deal related topics. I'd say, what are the things that I help with? I do help with financial diligence, but I'm not doing a QV. I'm not an accountant. I'm coming from the angle of sort of a strong corporate finance skill set and helping translate into terms that you might understand and basically helping you understand, like, okay, what does this mean for me day zero, day one when I own this business? And how do I make sense of the numbers? And what does that mean for growth drivers or risk? Or do I need to push on that or not? And then the last piece is like deal dynamics, right? I am a deal person. And what does that mean? It's like, what do I bring up and when? And how do I bring it up? And they came back with this. So what should I come back with? And just like you're talking about with LOIs and pricing and, potentially retrading, like, what do I kind of think is the right path here? And given your goals and given your risk tolerance. So those are kind of the things that I enjoy doing and helping with.
It was like hugely valuable, and I would argue that you are someone special. And this searcher community is very fortunate to have people like you, I think, who choose to bring your wisdom to this side of things. And it's pretty rare, and so thank you for sharing your wisdom and your unique perspective. And this was really awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.